right, guys. Assalamu alaikum. Today we have with us Tanveer Khan. Tanveer Khan has got a lot of experience in the field of supply chain and manufacturing, starting from Toyota, Rolls-Royce, and then finally he's working for a leading oil company. He's currently based in Malaysia, and he'd be talking to us from there. And today he's going to give you a brief introduction of supply chain 4.0 and service quality. We'll be taking questions through the chat window, so please keep your mics muted. If you have a question, you can type in the chat window, and we can. I'm gonna narrate your question to Tanveer, and Tanveer is going to answer that. So Tanveer, over to you. I think we should start now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Najam. So my name is Tanveer Khan, and today I would like to talk about supply chain 4.0 and the service quality in the context of supply chain 4.0. As Najam mentioned, this would be an introduction or more like a high-level view of both topics rather than detailed review of these. So we can, and as you know, any of these slides or any of the topics within this presentation today would warrant a presentation of its own. So we can talk about those during the question and answer session, and I would like to explain as much as I could. Before anything, just a little bit about myself and what I do and what I have been doing. So currently I'm working as the Global Supply Chain Operations Integrity Manager for Schlumberger, leading oil and gas service company. I have got 15 years worth of experience with Toyota, Rolls-Royce, and Schlumberger, working in procurement, sourcing, supplier quality, quality management, industrial engineering, project management, and some other aspects of supply chain. I've done MSc in Engineering Management from Brunel University in UK, and my first degree was Mechanical Engineering Bachelor's from NED University in Karachi. I am the chartered member of the Chartered Quality Institute, in other words, a Chartered Quality Professional, CQP member, so I can certify and test the new members as well. I'm also the Global Registered Auditor for IRCA, and I've got the Lead Auditor Qualification Certification with ISO 9001, 2015, and also API Q2. So I'm also a qualified and registered lead auditor for QMS. So that's just a little bit about myself. Sorry. Just a little bit of pause. I can't go to the next slide.
Okay, try now, Tanveer.
Okay. I think it's better if you can take it. So before anything, what I would like to do is to explain the basic terms during the course of this presentation I would like to use. So first of all, quality. Now, traditionally, quality has been defined as a non-conforming product. But of course, quality now adds up different elements of the quality, product quality, service quality, and integrity as well. However, in the context of today's presentation, when I use the term quality only, it would be primarily product quality. What I would call service quality is a broader term for quality, which includes the quality of the products or quality of the services, and in the context of the supply chain. And the other part, the other term which I would use quite often is the integrity. In the normal context of the business operations, the integrity does not include only quality, but also includes the regulatory, compliance, and social responsibility related elements, and sustainability. So these are the terms I would use during the course of the presentation. Hopefully it's clear enough. And if anything is unclear, please feel free to ask. Next slide, please. So why service quality is important? So here I would take you through some examples on why these are important, just to understand a bit of context. So the very first part, the very first example is an oil company incurred a loss of 15 million US dollars. What actually happened is one of their fifth tier suppliers who used to provide an electronic components which would go on one of the electronic boards, which would go onto a subassembly of the drilling equipment, which then would go to an assembly of the drilling equipment, finally, which would make up the whole drilling tool. And that small electronic component failed downhole and caused multiple failures in many different locations. The problem was related to the design of that component, and because that component was used in many different drilling equipment across the globe, the company suffered from repeated losses. As you can see, this is not just specifically product quality, as you would look into only first or second tier supplier, but overall process and service quality in terms of what is provided to the eventual customer. So think about that. The other example, in a modern day environment, is an EU apparel big brand faced a penalty of $7 million US dollars from different regulatory bodies and also the governments. Why? Because one of their suppliers was highlighted using child labor, unauthorized child labor, which is also, in other words, is mentioned as the abuse, child abuse. And they were doing that for many years. And once it was found out, the issue was highlighted to the regulatory bodies that, hey, one of your big leading apparel brand is using that supplier where the child abuse is prevalent. So that eventually caused a red money in terms of the penalties and, of course, the other massive loss of reputation. Next slide, please. The other example in terms of the service quality, and this is pure service quality, where one of the companies incurred a loss of 250,000 US dollars in terms of excess payment to the suppliers, who eventually refused the money to pay back the money, and the company lost that money altogether. They did not have the long-term contract with the supplier. They did not have any leverage over the supplier. Supplier finished up the business and went in bank with the extra $250,000 US dollars. So as you can see, a service quality issue which was related to incorrect data entry. And eventually what was that is that the incorrect currency symbol was used, which then was interpreted incorrectly, and the payment operator paid US dollars in terms of rather than the actual currency, and lost $250,000. All of these three examples are my personal experiences or related to my personal experience in the organization. And I would like to take you through these examples and the context of these examples during the course of the next slides to explain further. But the idea from these examples is to show you that how overall service quality is very, very critical or crucial to our business. So today what we would do is I would introduce you the concepts of the Industry 4.0 and the service quality linked to the Industry 4.0, that how both of these are evolved. Then I would like to explain you a little bit of supply chain 4.0 basics, then some basic elements of service quality, what makes up service quality in supply chain, and then what do we mean by the extended service quality, a little bit more detail in supply chain 4.0, because as the supply chain evolves into the 4.0 environment, service quality also evolves. Then we will talk about the new concept or where the supplier quality evolves into operations integrity, in other words, quality 4.0. And then lastly, I will talk to you a little bit about how to resolve the service quality issues when they do occur, and a little bit about how to focus best on prevention. And again, during the course of these, I would explain some examples and scenarios. Next slide, please. So what is Industry 4.0 and service quality? So Industry 4.0 is a term used by some research gurus on industrial engineering when government in Germany asked them to modernize the industry for the country. They set up this a series of seminars, a series of conferences back in 2010 and early 2011, and they came up with this terminology of Industry 4.0, which is to basically describe or define the modern industry. So Industry 1.0, this was more the 1800 scenario. The main drivers were steam and water power, and it was relying on the craftsmanship of the workers. And the concept and the quality concept was more about workers, how they are able to produce the identical products. So the quality concept was very limited. Just have identical products. There was nothing specific. There was nothing written on stone. Then 2.0, 1900s. So the industry evolved with machines and means of transportation, marine, a bit of aerospace, and modern or somewhat like pre-modern machines come into play, textile industry. The concept of quality was more inspection, which is more to control the quality after the process or after the delivery is made. And in some rare cases within the process, but it was again more inspection oriented. And you were relying on the people front of their adherence to the specification of the process of the product. Then comes the 3.0, which is more post-World War II scenario. And this is what we currently see as well. We are currently, as a whole, globally, and especially third world countries or developing countries, are more would more fall under the Industry 3.0, and they are evolving towards the 4.0. So in 3.0, the main drivers were computers, the modern means of communication, telephone, faxes, a bit of internet. And that's where the concept of quality assurance was evolved across the industry, like not just automotive, not just aerospace, but as a whole, industry was more open to the concept of the quality assurance. And you were relying on people relying on them to follow the systems, to be able to use the system, and to standardize the processes as much as you can. One example is the automotive assembly line, and many other different processes as well. Now, what is 4.0? As I mentioned, right, the concept evolved in early 2000 or late 2000s, early 2010s. The idea is to digitalize and what we call use the disruptive technologies. So it means automation, digitalization, use of mobile devices like phone, and basically make your work closer to your social life as much as possible, to make work flexible, to make it easy for people to use, and by all means use digitalization, automation, and use as much as technology as much as you can. And this also spreads across to use of artificial intelligence. And what comes with the territory is the operations integrity. So integrity is, let's say, the new word for the quality. I mean, it's not an academic term. It's something I would like to define in terms of what you use practically in the industry or big companies nowadays. So integrity includes not just the quality part, but also the compliance, regulations, and corporate responsibilities and sustainabilities. Things like trade control and compliance. Think about embargo of Gulf countries on Qatar. Think about American trade regulations on North Korea, Iran, Sudan, Syria. Think about EU's regulations on use of chemicals, supply of chemicals, and production of chemicals. So all these elements now make a part of the quality, or should make a part of the quality. And that, hence, the concept of the service quality evolves from quality assurance, or just the product quality, into operations integrity. So in other words, both terms are similar. However, operations integrity gives it a bit more bandwidth. Now, what Industry 4.0 relies on people, would be on people to basically design the best processes, design the processes which can be digitalized, which can be automated. So it's not just designing the process itself, but also smoothen it out so it can be automated. Thinking about removing the non-value added tasks or even the elimination of the tasks, which were important in 3.0 and and before beforehand. But now people need to think about the process designs, and also the other big element is the look into the big data and make use of it. So with 4.0, a very, very strong emphasis on the data. So that's where you rely on people to make sure that data is gathered, data requirements are structured, and data is used to do the analysis. So think of the service quality and the operations integrity into this context. That yes, quality assurance was there, but now service quality or operations integrity would link into these things as well: data quality, compliance, regulations, and overall process as well. Next slide, please. So what are the supply chain 4.0 basics, or what I would call modern supply chain basics? So the first important element is the service. What service you provide, or what level of service you provide to your customers. The other very, very important part nowadays is compliance. With industry evolution, with trade evolution, with many different aspects of businesses are affected by the geopolitical situations and other elements, even the modern day social lives, compliance make up a very important part in supply chain. Again, as I mentioned, compliance to trade restrictions, compliance to regulations, compliance to different substance, conflict minerals, things like that, all come under compliance. So this is one of the very basic elements in the supply chain. And the last part, cash. Any supply chain, any business, they are there to make money in practical sense, right? So cash is an important part. Now, what can drive these three main aspects of supply chain? What things you need to do or you need to follow strictly, which will lead to completion, or rather, achievement of these three basic drivers. So first of all, you should have a strategy. And in broad terms, I mean, a strategy can be a cliche word, but in broad terms, a strategy means like, how would you scope your business? What business you want to do? What are the main risks you see doing that business? And what could possibly go wrong? Collaboration. Collaboration is a very important part within supply chain. Almost even small companies now, they're not self-reliant when it comes to their supply chain or their business model. Every other company, even smaller industries, and even the big companies rely on a lot of different elements and different stakeholders and other suppliers to fulfill their supply chain and achieve their business goals. So collaboration is very, very, very important. Planning. Planning is somewhat linked to strategy, but planning goes a little bit lower level, where you plan out the tasks and the processes and your deliverables. So basically, as a business, as a supply chain company, what are your deliverables and how you want to achieve them? Then comes the order management. Order management is purely transactional. It's basically you're sure that the transaction is done in a compliant manner and also achieves the purposes of data, and on the other hand, service to the customers. So you need to ensure your order management is up to date, is up to the mark. The other part is the physical information flow. Again, linked to the previous steps or previous elements. This is the actual flow of the products, of the service. You need to really understand that what is the flow of the product or services you're providing, and what is the information flow. And one example of these is, think about a global company getting its products from, being headquartered in Europe, but getting its products from China. Very common scenario. could be so it's not just the supplier in the China or the headquarter client company in Europe. It's also different freight forwarders, logistics service providers who are involved in flowing that product or flowing that service and to the end customer. Same goes with the information end. So you need to think about that. Then comes the data management. Again, to further specify on this, a lot of different companies lack this. So they do capture the information, but they don't translate that information into meaningful data. Think about the process of source to procure. You source, you make a contract, then you start procuring, place the purchase order, and then you receive the item, then you pay the supplier. A lot of different companies stick to just the basics of those: PO number, lead times, catalog pricing, but they don't go to the next level, which means, again, the sub-supplier data. How much of the time taken by the suppliers, how much of the time taken at the customs clearance, how much of the time taken for the local logistics to deliver the items, things like that. These information are not usually captured. And these are very, very elementary to the supply chain service quality. And then comes the performance management. What I mean by performance management is when you plan out your deliverables, you need to agree and finalize the performance criteria. Like, what are your KPIs? What are your key performance indicators? And you need to be quite careful here. A lot of different companies come up with a bunch of performance management or KPIs scenarios which are not really relevant to the business. What you need to think is to think of these three elements: service, compliance, and cash. That's what should be linked to your KPIs, not anything else. And you keep them in smart, smart objectives, specific, reachable, and cover all those aspects. Next slide, please. So this, as you see, like, sorry, previous slide, Nigel. So this is all linked to your industry 4.0 supply chain. As you can see, you have a raw material supplier, you have a logistics supplier, then you have an actual manufacturer, then you have post-manufacturing logistics, then you have the customer, then you have an end user. So you can see that in the context of the supply chain 4.0, there is a lot more to it. It's not just one supplier, it's not just one customer. And you have a lot more of underlying data and information flow and other elements of the processes to look into. Okay, next slide, please. So quality 4.0 and operations integrity, as I mentioned, is beyond just the product quality. We talk about service quality, and think about the example I mentioned to you about that supplier with the faulty electronic component. So what actually happened? So basically, that component used to go into an electronic board, or what we call PCB. And that electronic board was designed a year ago before it was to be used in the field. When it was designed, the design engineers kind of overlooked the component's capabilities because it was coming from a fifth-tier supplier, and they had no control. They did not have any information. The supply chain did not capture complete information from that sub-supplier. What they did is they only relied on the main sub-assembly supplier who used to get component again from their second-tier supplier. So what they did though, what the main company did though, or the end customer or the end company did though, is they ran tests on the final product, which was the drilling tool equipment, using that sub-assembly, using that PCB, and using that electronic component. And the test passed, because one feature of the electronics component is that they sometimes pass on the first run, even if it is above their capability. Let me lay it out a little bit more plain terms. So some of the electronic components are designed around about like 100-degree and 90-degree centigrade operation environment. However, downhole in oil and gas industry, the temperature could go up to 120, 130 degrees centigrade. And when you test those components in a testing environment, the temperature might be 110 or 120 degrees centigrade. It is controlled, but it is not sustained. And the conditions are still quite different. So the component, however, in the next run, during the actual environment, the component would fail. Or the other thing which could happen, the component would pass the test and then fail, and then it still be used in the final operation. So what happened? They overlooked the sub-supplier's quality control, what goes into that the final product. So think about that, right? Like, it's not just the final product quality, but what goes into it as well. The other element is the operations integrity that would be based on the performance. As I mentioned, that performance criteria should be clear and not just on one odd incident happening. So again, if you look at your supplier or you look at any of your processes, you cannot just say that result of an incident would lead to implementing operations integrity rules or implementing quality rules. You monitor their performance proactively. You look into things like process yield. For example, you are placing a lot of transactions. Some companies doing PO transactions for you. They do 1,000 transactions for you. However, 100 of those on average are wrong. So you need to start looking into, enhancing the quality rather than saying, hey, it is 90%. It is still catchable at the end of the process and we can reverse the process, we can redo. That 10% is still a waste. So you need to monitor your performance and base your operations integrity processes on those. The other important element is value to the business. So a lot of times the quality people or quality personnel or quality department tend to go in a different tangent to the business. Business model asking for something else, but quality department, just because they are quality, just because they are bound to do the regulations, they look into something else. One of the examples I remember is that in my own experience, my company was adamant on auditing all the suppliers. And we had more than 10,000 suppliers. It is never achievable. It's not bringing any value to the business. Yes, your procedures say that, okay, audit all the suppliers, but that does not mean that you have to audit 10,000 suppliers. So you need to think and scope it in a way that it adds value to the business. And the other part, which is linked to the previous three as well, is also risk-based. So as part of the operations integrity or quality 4.0 focus is to analyze the risks. Another example, like in this scenario, there was some knowledge with the design engineers for the electronic components which go into the PCBs. However, the risk was not realized or not analyzed because they did not put it into place that, okay, something could go wrong at the component level. Had they realized the risk beforehand, they would have been able to save those $15 million. And I will talk a little bit more about how to apply risk-based methodology in operation integrity. The other element is account of regulations, HSE, and corporate social responsibility. For example, related to the textile sub-supplier, where their supplier was caught out using child labor. And I think until 20, 30 years ago, it wasn't considered such a big deal in practical sense. However, nowadays, it's a very, very important thing. EU and many different governments in the Western Hemisphere specifically are very, very strict on the corporate regulations. But because they were overlooking that particular element, not auditing their supplier, not knowing how the supplier business was working, they overlooked that element. And eventually, some reporter, some media personality, or somebody found out about what supplier was doing, and it not just affected the supplier, but it more affected the that big brand. Not just in terms of the hefty penalties, but also reputation, which is even worse in modern day scenario. Now, operations integrity, the switch in terms of quality or quality function, the switch is from enforcement to navigation. What do I mean by that? So quality people historically, again, in my experience in all main three industries, automotive, aerospace, and oil and gas, the quality people in my experience tend to enforce the requirements or the things they want to do rather than to navigate. what operations integrity means is that you navigate the business towards the integrity or towards the achievements of your goal, be it quality, be it service quality, be it regulation, be it compliance. So you navigate the business, and again, how you navigate is to look and link your requirement, your procedures, your protocol to the other top 5 elements on this slide. You look into those elements and link your requirements to those, and not just impose meaningless requirements, as I said, like something like supplier audits of all the suppliers. You need to think risk, you need to finalize your critical suppliers, and then you do the audit. Same goes for the processes. So not go to the enforcement, but rather navigate the whole business with you. And this is very important when setting up the quality function within a company, within an organization. Next slide, please. Now I will go one level deep down. I might go into a little bit more detail and share some examples with you. So with all the measures, prevention and proactive quality processes, risk assessments, risk mitigation, we all know, and I believe each and every one of us have seen this in practical, especially the people who have worked in the industries and work for a business, that quality issues do happen. Now, what to do when quality issues happen and how to do them profoundly. So you get, again, think of service, compliance, and dollars, right, or money. So you get the least loss in terms of those aspects of the business. So how to do it? So the very first example issue is issue understanding. Now, very first step rather. And the understanding of the issue is to gather the minimum facts before you shoot out to do anything else. And also communicate with all these stakeholders. So one of the examples, again, I would go back to the electronic component supplier failure. Basically, what happened is that initially when the failure started to appear, the people failed to gather minimum facts, which is, again, to look into what temperature was under operation or what temperature was occurring when the failure occurred. So basically, they neglect this fact. They did not gather this information and hence overlooked an important factual information, which would lead to the unclear resolution even. And then they failed to communicate with all these stakeholders. They only communicated with the top tier supplier who said, oh, this passed the test at the assembly stage. So we don't know what went wrong. At this stage, the incident investigator or the lead quality person should also have communicated with the all supply chain. Again, this was based, this would have been dependent on whether they had the information of these suppliers or not. But again, in this particular scenario or any other scenario, you need to communicate with all these stakeholders, like who are involved, not just at the stage where the product or service failed, but also who were involved in processing that. For example, this transactional failure, when the PO placement was incorrect. They only interviewed, if I remember it right, they only interviewed the person who set up the currency, who placed the PO who placed the payment order. They did not look into the person and the process who actually set up the currency. And it turned out it was an automated tool which misread, an optical tool. Think about it, an automated tool got the currency wrong. That can happen. So they did not communicate these stakeholders who were involved in that initially. So issue understanding is very, very important. I know a lot of times in practical sense, when you come across an issue, for your first instance, you can firefight it. But if you give it a good thought, you would gather very good information and try to contain the problem, which is our next part. So when you found out about the issue, you need to contain the problem and implement some checkpoints. This is again very important, especially in global trade or any regional trade. A lot of people overlooked it. And even in my experience, even in the big companies or the big corporations, they don't apply this correctly. So what do I mean by containment? When a quality issue does, again, the example of You heard about the drilling tool failure. Now, theoretically, if you gather the information, you know that it is an electronic component supplied by that supplier, by that particular supplier. So when you think of that, when you gather that information correctly, then you think about, oh, how much of that, how many of those components are in other drilling tools? How many of those drilling tools are under operation? Then you stop those drilling tools being operated. So you prevent yourself from multiple failures, repeated failures. You check your stock where the faulty part or the faulty subassembly was there. You check the stock for those faulty subassemblies for faulty products. And you apply different checkpoints that, okay, if a supplier is still producing those, then you add an additional check to see whether that part or particular component is still failing. So this goes across the supply chain, not just at one supplier, as I said, or one entity. Even you to think about your customers, your operations of your output. Think about, as a business, think about your warehouse, think about your stock, think about the items and the services which are in transit. Think about what's still a work in progress at the supplier. Believe me, overlooking at any of those would lead to an even bigger problem. The problem will be multiplied by 2. As it happened in this case, so the $15 million was just not one failure. If I remember it correctly, it was more than 25 drilling tools failed in many different countries and all across the globe. So just one small component leading to a whole big mess, just because the issue understanding, issue containment was not done properly. And then comes the root cause. So if you understand the issue properly, and if you apply proper containment, a bit of pressure is off you. So you can think about it, and you can sit back and look into the detail in a detailed manner and in a non-pressurized manner, non-firefighting manner, which is important and necessary to analyze the root causes. The first thing you will see, what are the immediate causes? So there are many different things. Root cause is not just always one, usually in the business problems. You usually have immediate causes and what are the contributing factors. So immediate causes, the problematic part was not inspected correctly. Okay, what was the contributing factor? Because it was not inspected correctly, or inspection wasn't set up, because the process designers did not think that that could be a risk, and it was not added into their process design. That was the contributing factor. The people who were involved in inspecting, they were not skilled enough. They did not have the idea on how to inspect and test or what to look for. So these are the contributing factors. And immediate causes, again, is the actual root cause, of course, is the product design in this particular scenario. But as I said, the immediate cause is the lack of testing or lack of inspection, or inspection or testing at the wrong point. Then comes, and again, the emphasis on the root cause is that if you do your 2 steps, the issue understanding and issue containment properly, then only can you apply the root cause techniques or find out the proper root cause. If you are under pressure on firefighting, then there is a bigger chance that you miss a step or mislook it. The corrective actions. So once you find out the root cause or immediate causes would naturally lead to the corrective actions. So corrective actions are not necessarily preventive. So corrective actions are not necessarily preventive actions. The difference is that corrective actions is basically what if any failure does occur, but you're able to catch it, or you're able to correct it through the process. So yes, you have still your supply chain process, you still have manufacturing process. However, you are able to correct it before it goes to the end point, or before it actually causes a failure, or before it actually causing a loss of cash, reputation, or service. So the corrective actions in this scenario would mean the process controls, like in-process inspection, final inspection. These would be your controls in the process. Sampling checks, there are many different forms. And the other part is the process auditing. So again, time to time, you process your audit your process, time to time at different ends, again, based on the risk and based on your root causes, you highlight the problematic or leaking processes. So you audit those. But again, these are not the preventive actions. These are corrective actions. Now the preventive actions. So preventive actions is more about preventing the issue from happening altogether. One part is mistake proofing, eliminating the risk. Now, in this scenario again, the electronic components, the design engineers actually found out that they could do without that component. That component, a particular resistor, was not that important for any operations on the board. They just added those because they were following a previous design rule. However, they did not need that particular component. So eventually in that issue, if you think prevention, you think of mistake proofing and they totally eliminating the risk. So if you don't use that particular component, you're basically eliminating the whole risk and the whole failure altogether. And this is what you call mistake proofing as well in some scenarios, right? And mistake proofing is very prevalent in automotive industry, in aerospace industry during manufacturing, but it also can be utilized during actual operations. So preventive actions, modern day quality 4.0 and operations integrity service quality scenarios, preventive actions are more about eliminating the risk. And if possible, eliminating the task altogether, automate it or design a process in a way that you don't have to. Like especially like, for example, in the case of wrong currency, which ended up the excessive payment. So rather than relying on the currency, why not just design a process or agreement with the supplier to make the payments in only one currency? Just an example, a theoretical example on how you prevent. So you basically eliminate the task of adjusting the currency altogether. So that's how, in summary, you do resolve your service quality issues in the context of supply chain. Next slide, please. Now, focus on prevention. I would elaborate a little bit more on prevention. We talked about mistake proofing, eliminating risk. The other important element, especially within supply chain, is qualification. And again, in global trade, in global supply chain, most of the qualification sometimes is specific to the producer or the product. You need to think about qualifying the processes as well, not just the product. Product can be qualified based on the output. However, you don't know how much of the process of producing that product is reliable, and not just the producing, also the end delivery. Again, in my experiences, I've seen a very common example that quite happens with manufacturing is that supplier was supplying a carbide seal, which is what I would say is quite like brittle. That's just an example, right? And then our company qualified the supplier based on the actual product. Okay, they produce a carbide seal, it passes all the tests, it passes all the inspection, fine, qualified. But what they did not qualify is the packaging and delivery of those. Now, the supplier supplied those carbide seals all together, merged together in one crate, and with aluminum and steel-based fixtures. What actually happened is that once those carbide seals flow through shipment, air shipment, marine shipment, they used to like hit together, make an impact to each other, like all the carbide seals in one crate, and that caused dents and what you call pits on the carbide surface, on the seal surface. And again, you're thinking under the impression that, okay, I've qualified the product. You don't see those seals. Those seals go into the actual assembly, and because they've already got cracks and pits and holes, they would break down very easily. So that again makes you think that the qualification of the whole process is important, and there are different tools to this. I will talk about those a little bit later. So those two, the important part is the process qualification. Think about that when it comes to qualification. Eliminating risk, as I talked about, eliminating the task altogether, eliminating the risk of failure. Performance monitoring. This is very important, for example, in transactional or subcontractual environment. So you don't wait until a failure to prevent it from happening. You also look into the performance trend. Transactional environment, even 95, 98% achievement of right first time is not enough, because one transaction could go wrong and you have this scenario of $250,000 worth of excess payment because you have no leverage to get it back. So even one transaction going wrong can cause you this. So you look into the in-process issues as well. When you audit or when you apply an inspection, you look into that okay, even if I'm achieving 95% or 98%, what could go wrong, and and how can I make sure that it is consistently improved? So that comes process improvement, performance monitoring. Then comes the process improvement. As I said, like a lot of times in supply chain, you have very non-value added processes, many different checkboxes. For example, purchase order approvals. In many companies, you have like many different people, or all sorts of people from all different departments approving POs. That causes delay, waste, and also, in some cases, lead to transactional inefficiencies, transactional failures as well. So when you think about that, when you think about process improvement, think outside the box and those elements as well, that how much of the process I can improve and smoothen it. And again, in the context of supply chain 4.0, in this particular scenario, if you have too many approvers on the PO, it would be very difficult to automate or digitalize it. And comes the mistake proofing. As I said, as I mentioned, the talk about like mistake proofing is to eliminate the risk. Basically, this is more prevalent in the bulk production or bulk transaction environment, where you eliminate the task or move it or improve it in a way that it would be mistake proof. Okay, next slide, please. Now implementing the operations integrity / quality 4.0 / service quality. How would you implement it? If you are a quality person, if you are a quality manager, if you are a quality student, you need to get an idea on what to do, what to look for in your jobs or in your day-to-day operations. These are the 4 basic elements you need to look into. The very basic one is to look into quality tools, quality assurance, and QC. So some of the examples are APQP, Advanced Product Quality Planning, PPAP, Product Part Approval Process. So this is primarily prevalent in automotive industry, a very comprehensive tool you can use in any industry, even in oil and gas, you use it at times. Aerospace uses this part of this process as well, and some of the aerospace companies. This is again more to ensure the quality assurance rather than the quality control. Then you have continuous improvement tools. You have Lean Six Sigma, which is all of these are big topics on their own, right? Like you have Lean Six Sigma, you have 5 Whys or the root cause analysis, which actually helps segregating the immediate causes from the actual root cause. And immediate causes, as I mentioned, help you to implement process controls, fail-safe mechanism, and the actual root cause will lead you to work on the prevention. Then you have DMAC methodology, again, structured problem resolutions. So some of the quality tools I described here are related to QA, some are related more to QC and process controls, and there are loads more. You need to educate yourself and you need to work towards understanding these quality tools. That's one part. The other new part, which is quite relatively new to all of this, is the compliance. So corporate social responsibility, as I said, one of the examples was related to the child labor. There are many different things which are involved here. Conflict minerals. This is about like minerals which are being produced or sourced from the conflicting regions, conflict countries, where it is not deemed ethical that the sourcing of these minerals or sourcing of the materials is not ethical. So that these type of things would come under corporate social responsibility. The other part nowadays emerging is the sustainability, like how much of, for example, your environmental credentials. So it's not just that you are causing like an oil spill, but also how much of like your emissions and things like that. It goes into a bit more detail. HSE, health and safety and environment. Again, it would be under operations integrity, not including to your overall service quality. And then you have trade control and compliance. as I said, right, nowadays you have many different elements of trade control and compliance. Qatar blockade by Gulf countries, American regulations on some countries, and also different materials. So these are related to compliance. So compliance and regulations. Some people term these as regulations. So as a quality person, you need to look into those and think about those when applying the quality principles. The standards. So there are quality standards which are applicable. Some are applicable to a specific industry. Some are more generic. ISO 9001 global standard, and even the ISO now evolved. A recent version, 2015 version, evolved. The biggest evolution or the biggest factor evolving from the 2008 was to apply the risk part into it and understand the context. So as you can see, even ISO is working more and more towards prevention and strategy of quality rather than quality control or even just the quality assurance. So they are linking and understand the business context. So they are linking the standard requirement towards the business context of the business and also towards risks. API Q1, Q2, these are American Petroleum Institute standards, so oil and gas industry. Same as ISO, they are also shifting towards risks. They focus more on the critical suppliers, critical products, critical services. So again, linking it toward the business, the standard itself is directing towards the business that, hey, if you are to audit or if you are to apply stricter control, it doesn't have to be on all of your processes. Identify your critical products, critical services first, and apply stricter controls towards them. Then you have TS 16949, which is automotive standard for quality. And historically, this has been the most stringent standard. And you have AS 9100 for aerospace industry, similar to TS 16949, quite stringent on prevention and quality control. HACCP, which is more for food industry. And the other standards, which are not quality standards directly, but lead towards the study of the other elements of quality and operations integrity, are like APICS. It's the supply chain body which releases the standards related to supply chain. CPIS and other, they are also looking into more and more into the organizational risks and how to, and also the people part, people skill part as well. And then when it comes to the risk management, which is, I believe, is one of the key principles of our operations integrity, you have FMEAs, failure mode effect analysis of this can be done at the product level, process level, service level, and HARC, hazard analysis and risk control. One of the two basic ones I have used quite primarily in my experience and in previous industries and then also in the current job. So these are the tools and techniques and principles which you can, and standards which you can rely on or you can use to implement the operations integrity principles or to start with it. Before questions, just would like to summarize. As I said, right, this presentation was more about the introduction of these concepts, and the details of for each of these concepts would require further sessions on their own, in essence. But the idea is to provide you the evolution of the concept of the quality, what quality stands for now, and eventually what it would lead to in future or in near future in the context of the industry evolution.
All right, thank you very much, Tanveer Ahmed Khan, for your time and for your insightful presentation. It's quite interesting to see how the supply chain standards are evolving from inspection and control into quality assurance, and maybe in the future into predictive analysis, depending using the data that is available throughout the supply chain. Thank you very much for this presentation. Now we have some time for questions. So all the participants, if you have any question, let me know. Maybe you can either type the question in the chat window or raise your hand, and then I'll let you take the question. All right, so the first question is from engineer Said Rizwan Ali. Ji Rizwan sir.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum. MashaAllah, it's a wonderful session. And unfortunately, I've joined a little bit late. And I just need to ask from you that, especially, you can see the condition in the Pakistan. So, what do you predict about the future of the supply chain in the Pakistan and about the 4.0? Please, sir. Thank you.
Very good question. What I would say in Pakistan, I'm not an expert, but I have dealt with the industry or our Pakistani contingent, the supply, is if, if you or you global trade and you are in Pakistan, you need to start thinking about regulations and compliance. Believe me or not, there is a lot of talk and chatter in supply chain groups, supply chain functions of big companies when it comes to compliance and regulations nowadays. Child labor, trade control and compliance. I don't know how many of you are aware, but if you go to US Trade Ministry website, um, I don't have the link right now, or else I would have given it. But I looked up it some years back when there was a project going on um, to analyze the Pakistan supply chain, and you would find out, and it is public. It was publicly available. Uh, they had a lot of Pakistani companies listed there, where they highlighted that, okay, these don't comply to our standards, and these are either red marked or black marked for one reason or another. So compliance and regulations is one important element that industries or businesses in Pakistan who are involved in the supply chain one way or another to think about. If you are a supplier to EU, you have to follow certain regulations in terms of compliance and also service quality. You know, your packaging needs to be immaculate. Your basically your own operations need to be ethically compliant and fulfilling the regulations. So that's one part. Look into the compliance and the regulations of the global trade, talking about TCC, corporate social responsibility, in order to earn business, in order to be a part of a global supply chain of anything, of any big business. The other element is to in third world countries or in developing countries, sometimes the access to technology is restricted. So that's fine. Limitation might be there. However, what you can do is to look into smoothing out your processes, reduce the red tape, and reduce the non-value added processes. You need to think business. So that is one another element in the context of modern supply chain service quality.
All right, thank you very much. There's another question from Ehtisham, and he's asking how companies globally organizing to adopt supply chain 4.0. Ehtisham, if you would like to add something else to it, you can unmute your mic and speak.
Yeah, thanks for kind of sharing my question, Najam. So just to kind of clarify, my question is around how organizations are in terms of investing in terms of people and resources to adopt supply chain 4.0.
Big companies, big players, from my experience, they're quite ahead in terms of their action planning. However, the biggest gap I see is that because of the hype, they took the step a little bit too early. In order to apply digitalization or automation or the generic 4.2 principles, and I think this is where it's kind of like misplaced information or misplaced knowledge or misplaced direction is basically they didn't look into their processes and data sets. So for example, if you are to automate a process, you need to understand your process and design it the best way that it is ready for automation. You cannot automate a process altogether if the process itself or the sub processes, first of all, there are too many steps always would hamper, and then secondly, you have like too many restrictions. So you have to smoothen out those first. A lot of companies are prematurely applying automation and hence not getting all the benefits. My own example, we worked on a project to catalog to basically automate the catalog requests, basically rather than somebody Just like on Amazon, you have a catalog of the products. So in my own company, you basically the idea was to automate the catalog procurement, just like Amazon. However, we realized that the way we do our catalog is there a lot of information which is not actually in the catalog and outside. So rather than looking into that, we started like the automation. And what happened that we eventually only got 10% automation. The aim was like 95%, and the first trial or the second trial, we eventually end up with only 10%. So yes, the resources wise, that was putting into the context. Yes, resource wise and basically action plan wise, the big companies which I see, like many different industries, they are on it. However, I would say quite a few of them are not reaping the benefits because they are not presetting their processes and data sets properly. And again, just like processes in terms of data, not many companies know where their data is stored and how it is structured. So they don't know about that. And these are the first two steps I believe need to be taken either beforehand or simultaneously when it comes to automation. Otherwise, the investment doesn't give you the actual benefit. As I said, right, we invested in the bot, we invested in the people, train on the process. The end result was only 10%.
All right. Thank you very much, Tanveer. I hope that answers your question at Sham. There were a few more questions, but I think we are running short of time now. So thank you very much for Tanveer Ahmed Khan for this insightful presentation. And thank you very much to everybody who attended this presentation. Please keep track of other presentations that are soon going to be launched. Visit Zaheen.com and keep track of the available training. Thank you very much. I hope to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you.